Guna পারি যথায় প্রেমার্পণ সমদর্শন প্রেমার্পণ সমদর্শন জগ জন দুঃখ যায় নমো নমো প্রভু বাক মনাতীত নমো নমো প্রভু বাক মনাতীত মন वचन एकाधार प्रभु मन वचन एकाधार ज्योतिरज्योति उजल रिति कंदर ज्योतिरज्योति उजल रिति कंदर तुमी तम भंजन हार प्रभु तुमी तम भंजन हार नमो नमो प्रभु बाक मनातीत नमो नमो प्रभु बाक मनातीत मन वचन एकाधार प्रभु मन वचन एकाधार ज्योतिरज्योति उजल रिति कंदर ज्योतिरज्योति उजल रिति कंदर तुमी तम भंजन हार प्रभु तुमी तम भंजन हार धे धे लंग रंग भंग बाजे अंगुठंग मृदंग धे धे लंग रंग भंग बाजे अंगुठंग मृदंग गाइछे छंद भक्त वृंद आरती तोमार गाइछे छंद भक्त वृंद आरती तोमार जय जय आरती तोमार हर हर आरती तोमार शिव शिव आरती तोमार वंदन भव बंधन जग वंदन वंदे तमाय जय श्री गुरु महाराज की जय। ॐ ह्रीं ऋतं तमचलो गुणाचेत गुणेभ्यः नाक्तं तेवं सकरुणां तव पादपद्मं मोहाङ्कषां बहुकृतं न भजे जतोऽहं तस्मात् त्वमेव शरणं मम दीनबन्धो भक्तिर्भगश्च भजनं भवभेदकारी गच्छान्तलं सुविपुलं गमनाय तत्त्वं वक्रोद्धृतोऽपि हृदये न मे भाति किञ्चित् तस्मात् त्वमेव शरणं मम दीनबन्धो तेजस्तरन्ति तरसा तृष्णा रागे कृते ऋतपथे तैराम कृष्णे मार्तामृतां तव पदं मरणोर्विनाशः दीनबन्धो कृत्यं करोति कलुषां कुहकान्तकारे स्नान्तं शिवं शुविमालं तव नामो नाथ यस्मादहं त्वशरणो जगदेकगम्य तस्मात् त्वमेव शरणं मम दीनबन्धो ॐ स्थापकाय च धर्मस्य सर्वधर्मस्वरूपिणे अवतारवरिष्ठाय रामकृष्णाय ते नमः। ॐ नमो श्री भगवते रामकृष्णाय नमो नमः। ॐ नमो श्री भगवते रामकृष्णाय नमो नमः। ॐ नमो श्री भगवते रामकृष्णाय नमो नमः। ॐ सर्वमङ्गल मङ्गले शिवे सर्वार्थसाधिके शरणे त्र्यम्बके गौरी नारायणी नमोऽस्तुते। सृष्टिस्थिति विनाशानां शक्तिभूते सनातने गुणाश्रये गुणमये नारायणी नमोऽस्तुते। शरणागत दीनार्त परित्राण परायणे सर्वस्यार्थे हरे देवी नारायणी नमोऽस्तुते। जय 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 महामाई जय जय भगवान श्री रामकृष्ण देव की जय जय स्वामी जी महाराज जी की जय।
Hello. Hello, check. नमः श्री यतिराजाय विवेकानंद सूरये सच्चित् सुखस्वरूपाय स्वामिने तापहारिणे. All right. So, last time, I think we had mentioned that there were these two directions of analytic enquiry that have gone on in the history of the human race. First, an objective enquiry, which is the natural thing to do because we usually gain our information, our knowledge from the world through our senses, and hence taking that as our starting point and trying to get at this unifying principle of knowledge, which unifies our experience in the world by putting all of it together in one unifying conceptual framework. This is the principle, the idea behind scientific enquiry. And we had mentioned two of these fundamental discoveries of the theoretical sciences, of the fundamental sciences during the 20th century. First, the discovery of relativity by Einstein, and two, the discovery of quantum mechanics. Also, both of them happened towards the early part of the 20th century, and the two together form, in some sense, the two pillars on which all of physics today, all of theoretical physics certainly, and its implications rest. And there is, as we had mentioned, the attempt at unifying these two perspectives. See, it's a very distasteful thing to have one theory which is valid at very large scales, namely relativity, and another completely different theory valid at very small scales, namely quantum mechanics. And as I had mentioned, that the difference in scale is huge. The cosmic scales are in light years, distance traveled by light. So that's about 10 power 8 meters per second, and multiply that by the number of years. So that's some huge number. On the other hand, the quantum scales are something like 10 power minus 34, 1 divided by 1 followed by 34 zeros. Yeah? So this is the kind of difference in scale. And we had mentioned that there had been kind of poetic or philosophical speculations in the sense that the human mind functions is the instrument which manages to capture all these scales and can think of them, both the light year and this 10 power minus 34 called the Planck scale. These are both notions that are there in the human mind. And firstly, I mean, one of the kind of guiding problem in the holy grail of theoretical physics today, in some sense, is to put these two theories together on a common platform. Why? Because there are certain pretty fundamental conflicts between these two theories, and essentially the idea would be to come up with something which would offer us a quantum theory of the space-time in which this universe is captured. The other thing that we had mentioned is that this naive deterministic worldview, which basically says that the setup now determines all future time, is a worldview that was completely overthrown by this discovery of quantum mechanics. And it means that essentially this naive deterministic worldview, which somehow says that, I mean, which at a very human, very anthropomorphic level, is reflected by this idea that whatever we do now determines our whole future, is something that has been called to question even at a purely scientific level. And it is here that we need to ask, if we come to the human mental world, what exactly does this notion of freedom which we are after, what does it really mean? And maybe, I mean, if you allow your imagination to stretch a little bit, what it really means is that even elementary particles do not follow this deterministic notion. So why should such a completely complex system like the individual human being, why should it follow this deterministic rule in terms of our life deeds, yeah? in terms of our life and work? Yeah? So this is a broad summary of what we had discussed last time. There was a request that I should illustrate by some examples. We'll come to that. That's there in the very next paragraph of this particular lecture by Vivekananda. But before coming to that, we'd like to mention one concrete problem. So far we just mentioned what exactly the scientific inquiry was. Now, what exactly is this about, what we are studying here? What exactly is Vedanta about? What exactly are these yogas about? And traditionally, they have been regarded as speculative philosophy, at best some kind of religious theology. But what has not been paid attention to is the purely empirical, analytical aspect of it, where what is our starting data? And the starting data is the internal life that any individual human being leads. Which means what? All of us are directly aware that each of us has a mind. Yeah? The trouble really is that we don't bother to analyze it and understand how it functions. This particular study, the science of the subjective being of the individual, is really what is at the core of all these things. The theology, the speculative philosophy, these are just trappings, these are just coverings on all of that, and it's not essential to this study of the subjective life of the individual. What is essential is the analysis, the understanding of what goes on inside us. And this process of enquiry, followed to the hilt, followed to the extreme point, to its logical culmination, is exactly what the study of Vedanta is supposed to lead us to. All right. And, of course, the intellectual framework, the theories that have come up, are really meant to be a framework for understanding this. They are not an end in themselves. And so, these are frameworks that are brought up to clarify our understanding. One of those ideas, in a certain sense, the one word that puts all our conflicts of understanding, our confusions, in one capsule is what is Maya, and that is the idea that we have been discussing. Now, what exactly is it? So we have to make sure we understand the perspective from which we are trying to understand things. First, if we are trying to understand things in terms of objective reality, then that is not the study of Vedanta here. What it is to try to understand what is universal in the subjective experience. What part of it? In a certain sense, it is a subjective attempt at de-anthropomorphizing ourselves. In other words, all of us have certain direct experiences of our individual minds. We perceive the world, it brings forth certain sensations. We take decisions on the basis of that. We have various thoughts that react to it. We have various emotive reactions. We act on the basis of these inputs. But subjectively, all these experiences, cognitive, volitional in terms of will, emotive, what is it in us that holds all of that together? Not in terms of its neuronal correlates, but purely in terms of the subject. Can we analyze it, put the mind as it were, like a patient on a table, and study it in terms of its constituent elements or constituent functions? This is the subjective science which is there at the core of any spiritual quest, and traditionally that is what has been there behind various religions. The stories that are concocted around it are then give it the garb of some kind of an organized religion, but that part of it is irrelevant. What is most relevant is this core enquiry. Yeah? This core science which is at the heart of all of this. Okay, thank you. So, this is what we are right now after. Yeah? What are the core principles? Yeah? Bereft of the kind of trappings that come from a social organization of this. And therefore, आप एक काम करो, वो जो बैस जो है उसको कट कर दो पूरा, ये एको कम हो जाएगा. हाँ, ठीक है. Yeah, okay, thank you. So, थोड़ा रिड्यूस कर दीजिए, कोई प्रॉब्लम नहीं है. हाँ, हेलो, ठीक है? या ओके. सो what this is really what we are after. What we are after is the science of the human subject. Today, I think this particular topic is coming up more and more and being viewed more and more as a field of scientific inquiry. The issues involved are not yet completely and objectively formulated, but I think we are coming closer and closer. When the vague concepts of philosophy or speculative ideas, etc., when these become precise questions that can be formulated and answered in terms of verifiable, quantifiable, and falsifiable phenomena, experiments, then it makes the transition from philosophy to science. That's this particular aspect of things. If you don't like the theory surrounding it, it's not important. What is important is the experimental science aspect of it, where one studies one's mind. This is a laboratory that is there with us all the time. Do we bother to analyze it and extract information, knowledge from it? That exercise, basically the focus of attention towards this internal organ which provides us with data every moment of our lives, do we bother to inquire into it? If we do, then what we are doing is practicing the science of the human subject. As with every other science, it has to be performed in the same spirit of detachment, so that what is most important out of this inquiry is truth. Namely, what are our findings? How universal are they? This is the point of the subjective query. We shall come to some experimental data which can be seen in terms of our external behavior very soon. But before we come to that, let me end this discussion with a particular problem which is occupying minds both from the objective or external science point of view, as well as from the study of the internal subject point of view. What is that? And it has occupied philosophers for centuries, millennia. What is that? The notion of time. As I had mentioned, that these two fundamental pillars of physics, in one of them, in relativity, time is unified with space and matter. It gives a direction to motion of massive bodies. From a quantum mechanical point of view, it also gives us this direction of evolution of what are called wave functions. So basically, the direction in which the world is moving, this geometry of space, the direction in which it is moving, that is called time. The point is, this naive idea of time, it does come up, it does give certain problems. We'll not get into that, but I'm just mentioning what is the objective notion of time in terms of physical theories. Now, the subjective notion of time is also something that is pretty universal if you study the way things come up and go down in your mind. So namely, if you look at individual thoughts then this sequence of thoughts that go on in our mind is what gives rise to this subjective notion of time. So essentially, one is using the mind to strip away from the world various details and come to the underlying structure, namely space, time, and causality, the direction, which gives us a certain notion of objective time. One. Two, that which gives us the sequence of thoughts and conditions it is what is called the subjective notion of time. So when we are asleep without dreams, or when one is in a coma, this subjective notion of time vanishes. We say we don't know how long we slept. We don't know how long we were conscious. Yeah? And then we compare the world that was there before we went to sleep with the world that is there after we went to sleep, after we wake up from sleep, and then compare those two, perhaps coded by a particular clock, and how far the hands have moved in order to infer how long we have been sleeping. The basic problem, let me assure you that I don't think this particular problem has really been addressed and very far from being solved. What exactly is the relationship between this subjective notion of time in terms of the distance between two successive thoughts, A. B. The objective notion of time, which strips away from this world the extra structure in terms of detail and captures it as the underlying causal mechanism on which our understanding of the objective world rests. And what one would like to do is try to understand the relationship between this subjective understanding of time and the objective understanding of time, and come to some position basically saying that, look, this is where there is a relationship and this is where there are contradictions. Why? Because any two sciences, if they are interested in truth, they should really converge at some point. And it is pitching these two perspectives against each other that would deepen our knowledge of this particular phenomenon, which has captured the imagination, captured the thoughts of profound thinkers over centuries, over millennia, and that notion is time. And we have these two particular points of view. What is common to them? That is a question that I'm throwing there, and you can address it this is something that those of you who would like to think about it could spend some time on it. All right, fine. Now let's get back to where we had left off. And here another fundamental problem is being addressed. And he mentions that every attempt to solve the laws of causation, time, and space would be futile, because the very attempt would have to be made by taking for granted the existence of these three. What does the statement of the existence of the world mean then? So essentially, what he is asking is, from this subjective point of view, he is reducing the understanding of the objective universe to this fundamental trio of notions, space, time, and causation. But these are born of the mind, and what is there behind it is the question. And our notion of existence is necessarily captured by these three concepts of space, time, and causation. And where do these things come up from has to be answered, maybe objectively, and there are theories of emergent space-time that are coming up in theoretical physics today, or how does the notion of space or time come up in our consciousness. So you can attempt the problem either from an objective point of view or from a subjective point of view, and we have just mentioned time as a specific instance of that. The point is, it's getting to a more fundamental notion, that of existence. And this is really the issue that this particular lecture dwells on. And the Vedantin's answer is stated in quotes right after this. It says, this world has no existence. Now, that seems to be a very, very drastic and almost false statement. And so he asks, what is meant by that? And he answers, it means that it has no absolute existence. This is from the subjective point of view, mind. And this is what he clarifies. It exists only in relation to my mind, to your mind, and to the mind of everyone else. We see this world with the five senses, but if we had another sense, we would see in it something more. If we had yet another sense, it would appear as something still different. It has, therefore, no real existence. It has, what does real mean? It has no unchangeable, immovable, infinite existence. That's one side of the story. And immediately, there's this contradictory statement, nor can it be called non-existence, seeing that it exists and we slave to work in and through it. And here is the final conclusion. It is a mixture of existence and non-existence. The idea of the permanent is there in all of us. The idea of changing as movable as not permanent. But then immediately the opposite notion of permanence comes up in us. And then the quest is, well, if all this is not permanent, what is? What is it in our consciousness, in the human subjective experience, that is not conditioned by time? Again, permanence and impermanence are within the context of time, and hence, if we are to make this enquiry, it has to be, again, what is the nature of time from the subjective experiencer point of view. Whether one likes it or not, this problem of time becomes a core problem to be addressed in order to understand these fundamental issues. Very good. So we have posed a problem. Now we would like to illustrate with some examples that come up from our day-to-day life. And this is what he comes to. Coming from abstractions to the common, everyday details of our lives, we find that our whole life is a contradiction, a mixture of existence and non-existence. There is this contradiction in knowledge. It seems that man can know everything if he only wants to know. But before he has gone a few steps, he finds an adamantine wall which he cannot pass. All his work is in a circle and he cannot go beyond that circle. I had illustrated this problem of mind, and it seems that we are conditioned to be caught within its framework. Every thought that we have, which is what we generally think of when we try to bring something into a clear concept, these thoughts are actually in time. So if we want to capture time, it has to be in terms of thought, but that is again caught in the framework of time. This is the contradiction. So in order to address this very concrete problem of what is the subjective notion of time, what is the objective notion of time, we are coming up with this particular contradiction. Yeah? We want to understand, we want to know, but it is as if we are up against a wall. The quest for knowledge bounds us in ignorance. I mean, this is the kind of contradiction that one is talking about. It's an experiential fact. This is what an illustration of what he has been talking about as Maya. As he said before, it's a statement of fact. When we try to know, we are immediately faced with the fact that we do not know. In other words, we are accustomed to thinking in terms of these logical opposites. This is not some abstract metaphysical speculation. It is an experiential fact. That is what is being underlined here. The problems which are nearest and dearest to him are impelling him on and calling day and night for a solution, but he cannot solve them because he cannot go beyond this intellect. And yet, that desire is implanted strongly in him. This is one illustration of this particular human condition, one of our defining properties, that there's a quest for knowledge, but at the same time, we are faced with a certain unknown which we feel we cannot break through, but still we would like to go and penetrate that wall of ignorance that surrounds us. We'll stop with this illustration, but I'll just mention a certain other author, Albert Camus, is a literature from France, originally probably from Algeria, where he comes up with this notion of the philosophy of the absurd, an absurdist. Essentially, what that means is that if we want to find meaning for various individual human phenomena, then we are bound to fail. And the acceptance that in the long run, nothing really matters is a way to satisfaction or happiness. There's a particular book of his called The Myth of Sisyphus. So Sisyphus was supposed to be this Greek god or somebody, some person from Greek mythology who was supposed to roll a stone up a hill, and as soon as it reached the top, it would roll down again. And he would have to come down and roll it up the hill again. This constant struggle of Sisyphus, it's a story, it's a piece of mythology, but it captures the human situation. On the one hand, we would like to go beyond. We would like to roll the stone up. But however far we go, the stone rolls down and we are in contact with greater unknown. The quest for human knowledge, therefore, is naturally conditioned by the unknown. There are these twin aspects that is there in the hearts and minds of any true scientist. We would like to know on the one hand, and the other, we know that every little bit of knowledge we gain exposes us to greater ignorance about what we do not know. On the one hand, there is this charisma, so to speak, of being part of this great human endeavor to know the world. At the same time, there is this pathos, and I'm quoting these actually from a book by a certain person called Michael Harris, Mathematics Without Apologies. There's a pathos which comes simultaneously from the understanding that we shall never be able to know all that we'd like to know. This contradictory situation, one, a love of knowledge and hence the resulting quest for it, simultaneously the awareness of what we are ignorant of, is the human situation in the highest quests for knowledge. Yeah? This particular example is an illustration of these contradictions which condition our day-to-day existence. So this is one particular illustration, one particular example. The quest for knowledge in science, in arts, in any field of human endeavor, any field of human knowledge. These contradictions. And it's an illustration of our existence in the world. This is what we are, what is the topic of this particular lecture, one illustration. We'll come back to this next time. Om Shanti 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 Harihi Om Tat Sat Shri Ramakrishna Arpanamastu.